and don't want it recorded, you can type it or something. There are people who feel, I don't know, there are teachers who feel inhibited when the class is recorded, and there are students who feel inhibited when the class is recorded. And if either, I guess I'm not inhibited, maybe I should be, but I'm not. If you're inhibited, you can just type out a question or something. Or, okay, so let's go back. So we're now on our curriculum syllabus sheet, Roman numeral 2, talking about Shabbat. Shabbat is a huge sort of area of Jewish life. I think it's an interesting thing to contemplate how that sort of emerges. I don't know that if you just read the Torah, if you were a Martian and someone like hands you the Torah to read, would you like realize that Shabbat is such a major element of Jewish life? Maybe, but I think through in the Torah maybe less obvious, but I think later on in Tanakh, Shabbat becomes more and more important and a core like identity marker of being Jewish. Although as you know, Caitlin, as you're demonstrating, it's not the ultimate value, right? And we do set aside Shabbat when it's necessary to save lives. And so that's also an interesting development, right, in Jewish history. Actually, it wasn't necessarily obvious. There were, in the times of the Second Temple, there were Jewish groups that didn't have that understanding. And actually, even in modern times, the Ethiopian Jewish community, they did not have this idea that Shabbat is set aside when human life is in danger. That's sort of very core to our conception of Judaism, but it wasn't the only version of Judaism that existed, or even that existed until recently. Shabbat is we sort of have it divided into two different Zachor and Shemor, letter A and letter B on the outline. This corresponds to the 2 times Shabbat is described in the 10 Commandments. So that's a big deal, right? Shabbat is is mentioned. Is mentioned in the 10 Commandments, which is, sort of suggests that that's significant and important. In Exodus, the Torah says, Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy, the Torah says, to keep the Sabbath day, Shemor. Okay, hello, Megan, welcome. Hi. Welcome, Megan. Please feel free to share your screen if you're, hi, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Have we met before? I'm not sure we...
No, because of the whole COVID thing, I saw there was the Zoom meeting, so I'm like, perfect.
Perfect. Great. That's what I think everyone, is sort of in that situation. Do you live in Lakeview, or are you...
Yeah, I live off of Hawthorne.
Oh, wow. Okay. So maybe one day we'll see you in person. Okay. I'm sharing it again, this in the chat function, the link to the Google Doc, which is the overview of what we're talking about. We are now in Roman numeral 2. Roman numeral 1 was actually classes I taught a while ago, and you can find them on the synagogue's YouTube channel. Okay, so we're now in Roman numeral 2. So the Torah describes the commandment to observe the Sabbath twice in the 10 Commandments. Let's take a step back. The 10 Commandments appear in the Torah twice. In the book of Exodus, as it occurs, we leave Egypt. The book of Exodus tells that story. We come to Mount Sinai, and God gives the 2 tablets, right? 10 Commandments it's actually not called that in the Torah. If you whatever, so actually read them and see how many commandments there are. It's not exactly 10. It's unclear what counts as a commandment, but there aren't 10 of them. There are 10 statements divided into some number of commandments, but observing the Sabbath is there. That's for sure. But in Exodus, the Torah says, remember the Sabbath day. In Deuteronomy, when the story is repeated, the Torah says, observe the Sabbath day, Zachor and Shemor. So Rabbinic Judaism understands these 2 commandments as sort of setting forth 2 different paradigms of how we observe Shabbat, how we respect Shabbat, and Zachor is the positive obligations of Shabbat, and Shemor is the restrictions. And the 2 of them, I believe, speak for myself, really reinforce each other and are necessary. That the prohibitions of the Sabbath, the restrictions on doing creative labor, carve out time, sacred time, a sanctuary and time in which we can then infuse it with a positive meaning. And so that's the positive obligation. If you don't have the negative, the positive will be crowded out. If you don't have the, and if you just have the negative, like you can just spend the day in bed. That's not so special, right? It's supposed to be an enjoyable day, a pleasurable day. So once you've cleared away the time with the prohibitions on labor, you can then infuse it with meaning and value. And there's, just the other day, I saw a statistic. Why did I see this? Oh, because everyone's talking about Thanksgiving, right? And the like Americans go crazy about, they freak out like it's, to sit, they're so anxious about, their radio stations with call it like turkey hotlines, and you can get advice and have, a newspaper columnist on how you're gonna, the olden day people used to, hopefully, people aren't having big meals this year, but, what do I do? How do you talk about politics with your crazy uncle? And like, what do you, like all these like stuff about like, it's just Americans have gotten out of the habit of having a formal meal with like people other than their members of their own household. Right. And it's like, there used to be and so I saw the statistic of like the percentage of Americans in 1970 who had a sit down dinner with, more than one course with people they didn't live with, who didn't live under the same roof as them. Used to be most Americans did that like 10 times a year. And now, it's a very small fraction of Americans who do that more than once or twice a year. So by carving out the sanctuary of time with the prohibitions, we're able to infuse it with meaning with a positive mitzvot, including having festive meals. That was right. That's getting at. So the time is available for family, for community, for introspection, for God, for really, really enjoyable things. Years ago, I met a woman who visited this community. This is before I wasn't the rabbi here yet, so that's why I was sort of very special about it. Because I was moving here, but I hadn't yet. So I guess I knew I was going to be the rabbi here, but I hadn't yet moved. So it was like a very special story to me because it was like something about the community that I hadn't yet lived. She was a grad student and she was interested in Judaism, learning more about Judaism. She spent a Shabbat here in Lakeview, just with like people her age, and she found it so like remarkable. She came back. We lived together in Princeton. She told me how amazing it was that because you had an entire community, her whole entire group of peers were, nobody was going anywhere. Everyone was on the same schedule. Like you went to synagogue in the morning, or maybe you slept late, but then you had lunch, and you had whoever you had lunch with, you could then go to find a friend, like you walk down the block and like knock on their door, because what else are they going to be? And then you could go to the park together, and on the way you'll stop by someone else's house, you'll knock on the door, and they'll come out and join you, because no one's going shopping, no one's driving off to grandma, no one's going to the movies, right? People are just around and available for each other. And she was so struck by that, like, and it's and raising children here, like I sort of see that with my, again, in the olden days, but pre-COVID, like we'd come to synagogue with my family, like we'd bring our kids and we'd come home with some different number of children, right? Because this one would go off to a friend's house, and that one would come to our house, and the other, right? And then we'd all meet up in the park afterwards, and the parks of the neighborhood, that you just show up at a playground in our neighborhood, and the weather's nice, and when there's no deadly pandemic, and you see like just kids are there with each other, with their parents, and nothing has to be planned. That serendipity is possible because everyone's on that same schedule. Okay, it also means that working class people and more affluent people, they can all have that experience of like being able to be with their family on the day off, right? If your form of recreation involves somebody else working, then that person who's working isn't having a day off from work when their children are home from school, or when their spouse is home from work, right? If I go to the movies on my day off, then the person selling me tickets and selling me popcorn and cleaning the theater, like maybe they get a day off. Let's say, hopefully they do get a day off, but it's on a Tuesday, not on a Saturday, and their kids are, their kids are at art school, right? So it's not quite the same. There's a study that unemployed people also feel kind of gloomy on Monday morning. And it seems that because when on the weekend their friends are around and they can hang out with people, and on Monday morning all the friends go off to work and they're still unemployed, and right. So it's time has a rhythm beyond what we actually choose to do with it. So by everyone being on that same schedule, by those prohibitions carving out that time, it really enables that time to be filled in really positive ways. Okay, that's my little editorial comment, but let's actually go a little bit more into detail. So Roman numeral, where are we? Roman numeral 2, letter 1. Okay, no, sorry. Roman numeral 2, letter A, number 1. Kiddush. So what are the positive mitzvot of Shabbat? So we sanctify the Sabbath when it begins by reciting this blessing of sanctification, which we recite holding a cup of wine. Wine was a very sort of symbolic beverage in ancient times. As the rabbis were sort of formulating how rituals should be done, they felt, well, certain rituals would be endowed with greater dignity, with greater meaning if we say these blessings while holding a cup of wine. Wine is, it's a very, it's you take a natural product and you refine it. It has to be not what's the word? Not distilled, but whatever. It's fermented in a process that requires skill and cultivation, and so we're sort of taking something from the natural world and we're giving human skill to tend to it and cultivate it, and something much nicer comes out. It was also the only way that people, before clean running water, it was like a safe way to drink, right? Water wasn't necessarily available and safe in like much of the historical recent history. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to assume more or less. Like, so Kiddush is a ritual. Sort of knowing nods if you know what Kiddush is, right? Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we are partners with God in endowing the day with sanctity, because the Torah says the Sabbath day is, God rested on the Sabbath day, the seventh day in Genesis, right? The very beginning chapters of Genesis, we're told God rested on the seventh day and endowed it with holiness. But then in Exodus, we're told, okay, remember that this day is a special day and endow it with a sacred identity. And we do that by, with our own mouths, declaring the day to be holy and special. Okay, and we do that holding this is coffee, but holding a glass of wine, which we then drink. So that's one of the positive mitzvot of the day. Okay, every Sabbath, as the Sabbath begins in the evening, we usher in the sanctity. We sort of identify it. So in that sense, again, part of it's sanctified because of the seventh day. That's every 7 days it has that status, but we're partners with God in endowing it with that sanctity and marking that sanctity, that the holiness of the day. We say Kiddush again at Shabbat lunch. That's sort of less of a mitzvah. It's more of just, well, we're having a Sabbath meal, so let's have some wine. We'll say a blessing again. But the real mitzvah of Kiddush is Friday night. That's when Sabbath begins. So we say the blessing of it, of Mekadesh Shabbat, the blessing that has that chatima, that seal, that end of blessing God who made this day sacred. At the end of the Sabbath is the ritual of Havdalah, which is sort of like it's like the mirror image of Kiddush. Kiddush ushers in the sanctity of the day. Havdalah ushers the sanctity out, and it differentiates between the Sabbath and the weekday that follows. Havdalah also, again, is a blessing that's recited while holding a glass or a cup of wine. One of those mitzvot, one of those rituals whose status is enhanced in this way. Havdalah also, we also say a blessing over spices. Everyone know the reason why we smell spices at Havdalah? You want to unmute yourself and know why? It's interesting. You heard anything? Alan?
Yeah, it's just another sensory reminder of the sweetness of something like that.
Something like that. So my understanding is that it's like a consolation. Like the Sabbath is ending. We're a little bit sad. So let's cheer ourselves up. Okay, fortify yourself for the week ahead. So smell something nice. So there's a blessing we say when we smell nice things. So we say that blessing, we smell some nice things. Usually people have little jars of cloves or cinnamon or something like that. And then we also say a blessing over the fire. Why is it appropriate to say blessing over fire as the Sabbath ends? Any guess? Hazard a guess? Megan?
Is it because stoking a fire is considered work?
I think so. I think it's like, because one of the things we can't do when the Sabbath is over, and it's like a pretty primal, like human, we're people, we have fire, like we use it to go and do things in the world, right? And we don't do that on the Sabbath day, right? So we light this large flame as well, and we sort of as part of our ending of Sabbath, right? Because the point is not working is good. Right? We're supposed to work during the 6 days of the work week, right? We're supposed to go out there and shape the world and build the world and make things and cook things, right? And we're supposed to be productive, and the rest on the Sabbath is just to have that breath of living in the world as God created it, as we've transformed it, and just inhabiting that world. And then we go back into transforming and hopefully improving the world during the other 6 days. But it's all important. I once heard a claim, which I think is true, that every time in Judaism there's something which is prohibited temporarily, it's because that thing is not a bad thing, but it's something that by pausing we can return to with greater intention and with a more meaningful way. Right. So, lighting candles is not one of the positives. So that's interesting. So lighting candles is a really interesting example, case study. Caitlin asked, why about lighting candles? Why is that not one of the, it's not on my list of positive mitzvahs? So actually, yeah, so it comes in as number 4 of Oneg Shabbat, of enjoying the Sabbath. So so I'll get there. So I'll just say 3. Number 3, Kavod Shabbat. We're supposed to wear nice clothes and be clean, have a clean house, and Shabbat begins. So we honor Shabbat. We show honor for Shabbat by taking a shower, before the Sabbath begins, cleaning our homes, wearing nice clothing, putting nice tablecloth on the table, sweeping, clean home, and sort of preparing for the Sabbath in that way. That's also one of the positive mitzvot of the day, and so that falls under honoring the Shabbat. And 4 is Oneg Shabbat. We're supposed to have an enjoyable experience on Shabbat, and that means like eating nice foods and things that we enjoy in that respect. And it means also having light in our homes. Okay, so that's where the candles come in. But it's also, there's a little bit of a hidden extra meaning there with the candles. The Torah says, "Lo tivaru eish b'chol b'shveitechem v'lo yom Shabbat." Don't have any fire burning in your homes on the Sabbath day, which some people thought, in ancient times meant you should sit around in the dark. The Torah says, don't have fire burning on Shabbat, so you should sit in the dark. Our ancestors, the rabbis, with their understanding of the oral Torah, said, no, it doesn't mean don't have fire that's in your home. It means don't kindle fire or transfer fire or manipulate fire. But if you have a fire that's already lit when the Sabbath begins, you can keep it burning. And not only that, but you should, because the Sabbath is supposed to be an enjoyable, pleasant experience. And so lighting candles is a sign, A, it's making the Sabbath enjoyable. And B, it's showing that our interpretation of the Torah is, this is how confident we are in our interpretation of the Sabbath, that we're going to have a fire, we're going to light a fire right before the Sabbath begins, to show that when the Torah says don't have fire in your homes on the Sabbath day, that means don't kindle fires, but you are supposed to have fire, light burning in an illuminated home. So it's both the thing itself, and it's a polemic message saying we're really, really confident in the oral Torah and the non-written rabbinic traditions and interpretations of the Torah, and we're so confident we're going to light candles. In terms of how is candles, what's so enjoyable about candles? So it's candles, it's like having light on really 2 aspects. One is if you have light on in your home, you're not going to trip and hurt yourself, right? So that's one piece. And the other, the rabbis understood the candles to be symbolic of harmony within the household, that husband and wife, for example, are going to be sitting at the table and talking to each other and having a harmonious, loving interactions on the Sabbath, because they can sit and talk to each other like human beings rather than stumble around in the dark. And okay, so it's that not hurting yourself, and it's about harmony and peace in the home. Yes, Alan.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the 2 references to Shabbat in the Torah, but is most of the tradition around Shabbat from the derived elsewhere from from the Mishnah or from other things?
Yes, I think with just about anything in Judaism, most of the details can't be found in the verses in the Torah itself. I mean, there are a couple of there are more than 2 references to Shabbat in the Torah. That it's the Zachor and Shamor. Those 2 references are in the 10 Commandments as they appear in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. There are a few others in addition to that, but most of the details come from elsewhere. In fact, the rabbi said that Shabbat is like they compared it to a mountain hanging from a thread, okay? Because it's like this vast corpus of law and tradition and philosophy and interpret, right? And it's hanging from just a handful of verses in the Torah. So it's like the classic example, really, of like really, it could have, yeah. And one of the examples of that is the Torah devotes chapter after chapter to describing the construction of the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the portable sanctuary that traveled with us in the desert when we left Egypt. That's the second half of the book of Exodus, the entire book of Leviticus, and the first half of the book of Numbers are all about this little temporary fabric hut that we traveled with us to the desert where we prayed and worshipped. And the rabbis understood that the the things that were done to construct the tabernacle, those are the things that are forbidden to do on Shabbat, because the Torah says explicitly, stop building the tabernacle on Shabbat. So the rabbis understand, all these things that we were entailed in constructing, the weaving and the chopping and the building and that, right? Like those are the things we can't do on Shabbat. So that's a way in which we try to have the mountain hang from a little bit more than one thread by saying these other chapters of the Torah that describe this building that existed once and no longer exists, and right, though actually these verses are telling us something that's something else and additional.
This is like the best book ever for understanding.
Oh yes, you have the best book.
I love this.
That's a wonderful book. Yes, that's a great book. And it goes through each of these 39 categories of labor. It shows how they were done in the time, like in creating the Mishkan, and shows like contemporary applications of each one of them. That is a wonderful book.
Wait, what's the book? Can we say it again?
Yeah, show us. Yeah, show us. Here, can I spotlight? Can I do that?
Where is it? The 39 Avot Milcha of Shabbat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's like you can find it in like.
You're open. Can you show us a sample page? But
Oh yeah. Okay.
We're not going to ask you to do a dramatic reading right now.
So like, let me find. So like this one, like it goes into like it talks about like what they did in the temple for plowing, and then like all these things that you can't do now, like you can't plant a tree and dig a hole and sweep.
The dirt floor. Yeah, exactly. It's a really great book. There are adult versions of those books.
But
actually,
more fun.
But that one is actually the synagogue has a few copies. It's a great book to have. The adult version, I'll share in the chat if I can. It's by Gadi Rabbi Riviat, and it's pretty expensive. So it's very expensive. Here, I'll share the link.
Are you gonna take me off speaker now? Like off.
Yes. I'm sorry. What?
Are you gonna take me off? Like,
oh yes, unpin you. Sorry, God. Yes, sorry. How do I do that? Cancel spotlight video. Sorry. Okay, back to normal. Right? Good. Better. Okay. Sorry. Don't make you self-conscious. Let me find. Is it better? Yeah. Here's. This is the adult version. It's very expensive. The shul has an extra copy if you want to borrow it. You can come by sometime. But here's just a few. There it is. It's called. It's a similar. It's organized. It's all of the 39 categories of labor, explaining the basic definition, what was done in the temple, and then like a discussion of contemporary applications. Okay, written for adults, but in in English and very clear language with illustrations. It's a very good book. The shul has an extra copy. If you want to borrow it. It's an extra copy. I think it's out of print. That's why it's so expensive. And it used to be when I bought it years ago, it was a normally priced book. So I don't know why it's become so expensive. Okay, so Oneg Shabbat. So nice clothes. So Oneg Shabbat, eat nice food you like, warm food. This again is another way in which actually the rabbinic conception of Shabbat, our ancestors, how they conceived of Shabbat, how their vision of Shabbat, their interpretation of Shabbat, their traditions, what Shabbat should be like as an enjoyable day, in contrast to some of the other versions of Judaism in the time of the Second Temple, where Shabbat was a very austere day, where sex wasn't allowed, where warm food wasn't allowed, where light wasn't allowed, a much more like somber kind of day. And you sort of see other religions that have Sabbath traditions. They have, some of them are much more somber. Ours is a much more enjoyable idea of what Shabbat is supposed to be like. I think that, if you read some of the descriptions of what Puritan New England was like in the 17th, 18th century, it was a very severe kind of somber day, right? I mean, that's sort of interesting, right? That's sort of that part of the Puritans, like it's sort of being forgotten, that they came to America because they wanted a more rigorous, Sabbath environment. That's why they moved here, right? So that's sort of people forget that. But for many, many years, the Sabbath was like a big deal in America. I think now it's just you can't buy lumber in Bergen County or something. That's like on Sunday. That's all we have left. A few blue laws, but it was once a really, really big deal that motivated people to, cross the ocean. There's a scholar named Judith Shulevitz who wrote a book called I think The Sabbath World, about sort of the history of the idea of the Sabbath, not just in the Torah, but also in American history as well. And she interweaves that history with her own attempts to observe Shabbat as a Jewish person. So it's a sweet book. She's a good journalist, a good writer. It's a good book. Okay. Let's number 5, this Shabbat meal. So we have 3 meals on Shabbat: Friday night, Saturday lunch, and then a third meal sometime Saturday afternoon. And these meals are eaten with so the Friday night meal is preceded by Kiddush, sanctification of the day over wine, and the Friday night meal and the Saturday lunch meal and the Saturday afternoon meal is a meal eaten with said over bread. That's how a meal in Judaism has meaning. I think now bread is like a, I don't know, it's like a side, I don't know, maybe you have a sandwich, otherwise it's bread is like something you have the beginning of like a few bites of something. But in the ancient times, in Talmudic times, bread was like your silverware and your plate, as well as the main source of carbohydrates, right? You had like pitot, pita breads, and you dip them in things, right? So you have a big dish of something, whether it's vegetables or meat or whatever it was, and you would dip your bread, and that's how you ate. So a meal with bread was like a real meal, whereas a meal without bread was like a snack. So the Friday night dinner should have bread, the Saturday lunch should have bread, and the Shabbos afternoon meal should have bread. Certainly Friday night and Saturday lunch should have 2 whole loaves of bread. We call that traditional bread challah, right? That's, and so that's a way to kind of endow these meals, like holiday meals. Sabbath meals are meals said with bread, eaten with bread, where we start the meal with two intact loaves of bread as the meal begins. There are hymns and songs sung at these meals. Friday night, there's a hymn called Shalom Aleichem, which is a song welcoming angelic presence to our homes and to our meals, wishing them well. There's a song called Eshet Chayil, which is actually, it's a biblical text. It's the last chapter of the biblical book of Proverbs, which describes a valorous woman. Was added to the Friday night liturgy, not because of any actual woman, but as the personification of the Sabbath presence herself, as how those who put it in and added to the Friday night liturgy they gave it this mystical meaning. But it's sort of nice if there's a woman who, it's like, I don't know, it's a nice thing to say for the mother of the home, or, if she's around. You can be true on multiple levels as well. It can be a praise of an actual woman who's at the table, or it can be in praise of the Sabbath herself as a personified as a woman. Whereas the feminine aspect of the Godhead, that's a more mystical understanding. And there are many, many hymns that have been written over the centuries that are sung at many Shabbat meals. You could sing any song, but the point is you should be enjoying yourself, right? No one has anywhere to go. No one has anything they have to do. You can just enjoy being with the people at your table, or enjoy being by yourself, and singing is a wonderful way to do that. And so there are, a few dozen zmirot, a few dozen songs in praise of the Sabbath written in poetic Hebrew that have been written over the centuries. And there are, let's say, 2 dozen classic, maybe 1 dozen, I don't know, maybe like 1 dozen. The most famous, maybe 12 songs. Some of them are typically sung Friday night, some are typically sung Saturday at lunch, maybe 12 songs. Each song has 2 or 3 really famous melodies and another 5 or 6 less famous melodies, and people are constantly writing new melodies to all of those songs, and you can teach those melodies to your guests, and you can you can find them on YouTube during the week and then sing, learn new melodies yourself, or the traditional melodies that maybe you heard from your teachers or from your parents or your grandparents. There's one of these mirot that's typically sung on Friday night. I heard when I was 13 years old. I traveled to London for my first trip to Europe with my family. It was my mother's 50th birthday. My father had relatives in London. His uncle lived there. We spent a Shabbos with my uncle, and my uncle and his family, they sang one of these Friday night hymns to a particular melody, and I'd never heard it before. I loved it. And then 3 or 4 years later, my cousin, and my uncle's son came to America, and I spent Shabbos with him. We were all staying together with other cousins, and he sang this melody. I was like, oh, I remember this melody. I heard it. And he said, oh yeah, this melody actually goes back in our family like 3 generations, 4 generations. Like our family sung this melody, before the war, when we all lived together in Nuremberg. And I was like, wow. But I couldn't really remember it. And then it was like a few years later when I heard it a 3rd time when he visited again. And then I was like, oh, now I remember this melody. And so my kids know it now, right? So this is a melody that my my grandfather sang with his siblings and parents in Nuremberg in the 1930s. My grandfather, who my father never knew, who I never, right, who died, in the war, right? Like, so it's a beautiful, right? And my kids know the song now. And there are other melodies which are much more common, much more popular, and et cetera. And musicians are constantly thinking of new ones. It's a wonderful way, again, just to like, who sings anymore around the table, right? I think most Americans used to do this before recorded music. Like all music was like, you wanted music, you had to sing, you had to work for it. Okay. 100 years ago, everyone sang when they gathered, to celebrate good times, when there were, Mark Sata, everyone sang. It's really great that we still have this in our lives. Okay. I think I'm going to pause here at this point. We did letter A. Next class, we'll dive into letter B. Letter B, we'll take the time to go through. I don't know if we go through all 39 of those categories of labor. We'll go through a bunch of them, and then we will continue. I think the next class is already on the calendar, so please consider coming, and please reach out if you have any questions that come up in between, or questions that whatever I spark something you're thinking about, please feel free to reach out in between classes. But you can contact the office to set up a meeting, or just send me an email, and I'll try to get back in a timely fashion. Okay. But thanks all of you for joining, and looking forward to continuing to learn together in the coming weeks. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving too. All right. Take care. Bye.